Yeah, so as Fadil has mentioned, I'll be talking about the findings from the NICE trial, which is a double-blind randomized controlled trial of N-acetylcysteine for methamphetamine dependence. And just so you understand the rationale for this, N-acetylcysteine is a prodrug for cysteine, which has the potential to restore glutamate homeostasis in addiction, which is basically glutamate is thought to be disrupted. The regulation of that particular chemical in the brain is disrupted when people are addicted to stimulants or other drugs, and cysteine can help restore that disruption. It's been found in preclinical studies to reduce drug seeking, and in human studies, it's been found to reduce drug craving across various different types of drugs, including methamphetamine. But it hasn't been tested on methamphetamine use per se. So we know it can reduce craving, but we don't know whether it can reduce use, and that was the motivation for this study. It's also conveniently a very potent antioxidant. If you work in emergency medicine, you'll recognize acetylcysteine because it's used in paracetamol overdose. It has a similar property in context of methamphetamine use in that it can reduce toxicity. So it's actually protective against methamphetamine-induced neurotoxicity. So this background has led us to two ideas. The primary idea is that hopefully it will be able to reduce days of methamphetamine use, and we've got two measures of that, days of use, and we also took oral fluid samples from people. We're looking at the percentage of methamphetamine positive oral fluid samples. Then we had secondary outcomes, some of which were related to methamphetamine use, the craving, severity of dependence and withdrawal, but we also were interested in the psychiatric symptoms, and that's because some of these are related to the oxidative stress and neurotoxicity from methamphetamine use. So we're hoping that if this drug could alleviate that neurotoxicity, that it might reduce some of the harms that we see in terms of psychiatric symptoms. And there is indeed evidence from the broader psychiatric literature that N-acetylcysteine can reduce some psychiatric symptoms in people with psychiatric disorders. So we were able to recruit 153 people, randomize 153 people for the trial. We actually had an incredibly good response from people, and a lot of the people that we excluded because we couldn't get them into the trial. They just ended up waitlisted. Half went into NAC, half went into placebo. They got 12 weeks of NAC, it's take-home medication, or 12 weeks of placebo, so it's double-blind. We had good adherence compared to previous methamphetamine pharmacotherapy trials, but overall it was 67%, which is still suboptimal. You really want more than 80% adherence, so that's a challenge that we are facing. Overall, we had 69% of our follow-up assessments done. They were weekly, so very intensive follow-up with people. But the good thing is, with our measure of days of use, it didn't matter if someone missed an assessment here or there, because if we were doing them weekly, we could actually track back to the previous assessment. And that meant overall we had 88% complete data on our primary outcome of days of use. For the oral fluid tests, because that required face-to-face contact at each weekly assessment, that was lower. And a little bit less in the NAC group than in the placebo group. So that's the method. What did we find? So this graph shows you median days of use in the bars, and you can see here at the start of the trial at baseline, people had used on a median of about 24 days in the past 28 days. So we had a group of people who were using the drug very heavily. The dark bar is the placebo, the white bar is the NAC group. And you can see here what's happened 4 weeks into, this is all on medication here, 4 weeks into the trial, 8 weeks into the trial, and 12 weeks into the trial. Both groups reduced their use significantly, down to around 15, 16 days in the past month, so a significant reduction in use. However, NAC did not reduce use more than placebo. So we have no effect of NAC on days of use. You can see here in the lines that we have the percentage positive methamphetamine oral fluid samples. That's on the axis over here on the right-hand side. And you can see no difference between the groups there. We also looked at craving, and we saw strong reductions in craving from baseline to the rest of the trial. However, there was no difference between NAC and placebo, so we have no effect on craving. The same pattern of results for severity of dependence. People reduced their severity of dependence once they're in the trial, but it made no difference whether they're on NAC or placebo, and the same pattern of results for withdrawal, absolutely no difference between groups. Looking at psychiatric symptoms, so psychotic symptoms in this context is symptoms of paranoia and hallucinations. So feeling overly suspicious and seeing things that aren't there. They're usually fairly mild in this population, but in this context, we can see firstly a lot of variability in symptoms, but we are not seeing any clear difference between the NAC group and the placebo group. The NAC group is in black, the NAC group is in blue, the placebo group is in black. So placebo is always black in these graphs. Same for depression, we didn't see any significant difference between the groups. And even though it looks like there might be some separation here between the NAC group and the placebo group, there was no significant effect of NAC on suicidality. However, one little glimmer of promise here is in terms of hostility. So our measure of hostility would be whether someone was overtly angry, yelling at someone, maybe throwing things around, breaking furniture, right through to hitting someone. And on this measure, you can see here that the black group is the NAC group had quite a lot higher proportion reporting hostility compared to the NAC group. Now, when we tested this, we can see quite a large effect. However, we had quite stringent criteria for what we call a statistically significant result, and we just missed that. It should have been less than 0.01 and we got 0.02. So we can only regard that as a trend. In conclusion, N-acetylcysteine didn't work. Take home oral NAC did not reduce meth use relative to placebo in this group of people who are dependent on meth and using very heavily, nor did it reduce craving, severity of dependence or withdrawal, or most psychiatric symptoms. But it might reduce hostility. We have to be very cautious about interpreting that effect. However, there have been a couple of trials in autism of N-acetylcysteine which have had a similar result where it's reduced irritability. So that's something we'll be looking into in a little bit more detail. If you're interested in the full results of the study, they'll be available via our website, www.nicetrial.info. And in closing, I'd like to thank the many wonderful people who worked on this trial. And this is but a few faces. You can see here a very long list of people who've been part of this effort, which has taken several years to complete. Particularly the participants and people who inquired about the study. I'd like to thank them in particular. So thank you.